My name's Brad Windemuller, and I'm going to share a little bit of my story and my struggle with addiction. I grew up here in Grand Rapids, and I actually grew up going to church my whole life. Attended the Christian school for like the second half of my life, and kind of knew all the right ways I was supposed to do everything. Growing up, I had a dad who was a hard worker, and he had a very high standard, kind of almost like a perfectionist. Everything had to have its place and be in order. His barn, every tool, perfectly hung up, and he knew if one thing was missing. And I always wanted to be just like my dad, so I would go out and I'd work with him all the time. And what I found, though, was that no matter how hard I tried at what I did, he always found something that was out of place with it. So he'd always be pointing out what was wrong. Here's what you need to fix. This isn't right. Let's do it correct. And I don't think I really realized at the time the effect that was having. But over time, by the time I hit probably middle school, I really felt like I was worthless, that I didn't measure up. There was something wrong with me. And I also felt like my dad, that I wasn't as important to him as his things, because he paid so much attention and spent so much time in his barn with his tools and what he worked on, but with me, it was kind of like I got whatever was left. And I know my dad loved me, and I have a great relationship with him today, but in 6th grade, they switched me to the Christian school, and I remember just crying. I did not want to switch schools. All my friends were at the public school. And I just remember that whole summer as just this argument back and forth with my parents. And I think it was a couple weeks before school started, my dad said, "We don't care what you want. You're going to go where we want you to go." And I think that day there was something in my heart that just snapped. It was just, I felt that they could care less about me, and it was all about what they wanted. And that day I just kind of began to make a determination in my heart that I was going to show them that they couldn't have their way. That by not noticing me, I was going to repay them. And I became very rebellious. I also made a determination to hate school. I wouldn't try. Anything someone asked me, I'd do the opposite. And so this kind of led into 6th, 7th, 8th grade. Also in this process, I became very, very depressed. And there was all this emotional pain that came up, this loneliness, because I'd pushed all friends away. I didn't feel like I had a safe place at home. My parents were they didn't know what to do with me at this point. So I started to see counselors. They started putting me on medications. They'd help for a little bit, but it really just numbed the pain. And but that emotional pain was so deep, and I started to cut. And it put a physical pain that I could grasp, and it took that emotional pain, kind of dulled that down. By the time I hit high school, I started dating this girl, and that became my new coping tool. Sex and just this doing whatever I wanted, and this person that I felt completely accepted with, that was my new God. And I still was cutting and started getting into smoking pot. And I remember when I started smoking pot, I don't think drugs at first were ever really the physical addiction that got me, but it was the fact that it was the first time I ever felt this peace. There was this sense of like, this is what it feels like to not have all this crap stirring inside. And so drugs started to become my solution. It really, as I look back, it wasn't the problem. It was more my solution to a deeper issue. And that was the same thing with the sex and all these other things. It was just a solution to a deep problem that was going on in my life for years. That kind of progressed till I was about 23. I was into heroin, and had been doing that for about 2 or 3 years, and I was just a complete mess. I tried committing suicide. And I remember that didn't work, and that just made me more angry because I couldn't even get out of my mess, even though I got myself into it. And that was when I ran into a man named Dean, and and he just had a conversation with me about that I might be stuck spiritually. And some of these things I may not feel like I have so much control over, but that they have control of me. And I knew exactly what he was talking about, especially in the cutting and the addictions. It was like no matter how hard I tried, you just couldn't get out of this rut. And so I started to meet with Dean, and first thing that he shared was Christ and the need for a Savior. And that was the moment that it clicked in my head that I couldn't save myself. I needed a Savior. And so that's where it began, was with Christ. And then it was starting to process through and dealing with forgiving and looking at things in my past and allowing Christ to heal those areas. And it's been quite a journey. I mean, even today, sitting here looking at some of the stuff we're looking at today, it's just, there's still places in my life where I find, I don't do drugs anymore, but I find I've traded some of that stuff for, well, now I got a job and I can find acceptance and value there. And it's always this, God is bringing me back to, it's Christ alone. It's only Him. And I know that I have this need to do things just right, and I can be very hard on myself when I don't feel like I measure up. And that still is a huge struggle today. And thankfully, sitting here today, it's one of the things I get to be reminded of is God's grace in that. So I know that for me, though, the real issue was not the drugs. It was the pain. It was the fact that I felt like I was worthless, and I felt like I was all alone. I could be in a crowd of 100 people and feel like I was the only one there. Nobody noticed me. And drugs, the sex, even today, I think one of my coping tools still is I can just somehow like mentally check out and yet be present. And it's just this emotional buffer that's there. And I found that all through my life, the only place that has fixed any of these things is when I've come to the end of myself and Christ has done a work there. I know I became a Christian when I was 23, but I didn't quit drugs until I was 26. And that didn't come until I was facing 15 years in prison. And that broke me. And it was like, all right, something's got to change. And that was where I surrendered a large chunk of my own sufficiency. But I find there's more of these places as I keep looking. And so I'm still on this journey, and I just thank you for this privilege to share here this morning. So.